Hi, welcome to PodCatalyst. I'm Peter Finn, Executive Director at IABC, our International Association of Business Communicators, and we have a couple of great guests that will be speaking at World Conference. Before I introduce them, I wanted to share some news that I think many of our members and the IABC community will be interested in. And I'm joined here by my colleague Jenny, who oversees our certification program. And Jenny, what's the big news with certification that we should make sure that all our members know about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the big thing that's happening that we're launching in June is remote proctoring. So we're very excited. This is definitely going to be a great opportunity for us to branch out and really get more candidates to start testing internationally.
Great. And so remote proctoring means that I can take this exam for CMP and SCMP, so the communication management professional, senior communication management professional, and I can take that from anywhere. Is that right? As long
That
as
is
a computer and a connection?
Yes, that is correct. So we use what we're going to call live remote proctoring, which is definitely just another form of proctoring. What you will experience is that you will have a proctor that will verify your identification, and then they will probably ask you to do a 360 degree sweep of the room with your webcam. The important thing that we have to do with remote proctoring, and again, it allows candidates to access the exam across the world, more accessibility. Your home does become your testing center.
Mhm.
So that is definitely the biggest change because currently you have to go to an inside location, and sometimes those locations are not accessibly available to our candidates, especially with the pandemic we have all gone through. So this is, again, another opportunity for us to have the CMP and the SCMP more accessible to our candidates.
And there's no certain time of day. I could take this any time during the day. There's no issues with that.
No, none at all. They have proctors 24/7.
Wow.
7 days, yeah, 24/7, 7 days out of the week. It really all depends on when the candidate wants to take the exam.
Okay. And if I want to take the exam, what does it take like a couple weeks to get it set up, or what's the term?
So, so the process from the day that you actually submit your application, there is a 30-day waiting period from the moment you submit your application. So it's important that you get your application as soon as possible because we as staff, we do verify employment, we verify training, and that takes a while for us to get that completed. So after those 30 days, candidates will receive an authorization letter directly from, we're going to be using Prolidian, or you're going to see that's the vendor that we're using to host remote proctoring for us. So you'll receive that notification from Prolidian, and then you basically have 24 hours, you're able to take the exam from the time that you receive the notification. So it is quite quick. It's pretty much instant from the time that you receive the authorization letter to the time of testing.
Okay. Well, excellent. So just, one more plug is that CMP and SCMP is the only certification within the communication space that is ISO compliant and ANSI certified. Is that, or accredited rather? Is that?
Yes,
Yes.
that is correct. So we are internationally in compliance with ISO 17024, which is the standard that we abide by through in our accrediting body is ANSI. So both programs are accredited. And I think this is why there has been this long waiting period for remote proctor because of these very strict guidelines that we have to abide by in order to even be approved for remote proctoring. So it's basically going through the reaccreditation or the accreditation process of the two programs because our accrediting body has to go in and verify the platform itself, because the important part here is that not only are we changing the modality of how we're offering the exam, it's now understanding okay, what is the security implementations that we are going to be basically dealing with. So I think this is why the process is so stringent when we're changing from, now candidates going to an on-site location to, okay, now the candidate has to be in front of the camera on their computer in their home. So this is one of the main reasons why it has taken such a while for the GCCC to really get remote proctoring up and running.
Yeah. Well, it's very exciting. And I know I've just had a lot of inquiries from folks about when it will be ready. So So it's, thank you for all your work on it and also the GCCC. So anything
Yeah.
else you want to add?
Just I hope candidates are ready because we're very excited to get this going. The more the merrier. It's going to be great. I hope, candidates are going to have a very awesome experience with it. And again, it's going to be from the comfort of their own home or wherever they want to take it, as long as it's
take it in your pajamas or there's no
right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thanks so much. Again, remote proctoring will be launched end of June, so right around World Conference, which is a good segue to our two guests. But thank you so much, Jenny, for all the information. Really appreciate it. And all your work.
Thank you. Yep, absolutely.
And so now I'm just going to introduce our two guests who will be speaking at the World Conference. They are presenting a session called Connecting Via Technology to Address COVID, Climate Change, and Conflict. So we had a great discussion. My two guests are Ziena Jalil and Natasha Meleisea, and both are from New Zealand. And Ziena is a business and public sector leader focusing on deepening New Zealand's engagement with Asia Pacific and bringing equity and opportunity to those with diverse experiences. She does a range of consulting on strategy, stakeholder engagement. She's a keynote speaker, has held several governance roles in the international relations space, education, health sectors. Ziena is recognized by Campaign Asia Pacific as part of its 2020 Women to Watch and has received several international awards for her work promoting New Zealand trade and education in Asia. And Natasha brings in an inclusive approach to all aspects of how she operates in business. She's of Samoan heritage. She weaves cultural diversity into her management style and embraces difference as a strength. She's held a number of senior executive roles in both commercial and nonprofit media organizations, which we talked a bit about, with a focus in particular on building Indigenous media performance capacity and capability. She's the CEO of PCBL, Pacifica TV, funded by the New Zealand government with an aim to strengthen the broadcasting collective of 24 Indigenous broadcasters across 14 Pacific countries. So we had a fascinating discussion. I am definitely going to be in attendance at their session at the World Conference in New York City, and I think you'll really enjoy the discussion. Thank you so much for joining me to learn a little bit about you and the session that you're going to be hosting at World Conference, Ziena and Natasha. So usually we kick off the podcast interview with just tell us a little bit about yourselves and maybe talk about how you co-created this session and this idea and where that kind of the genesis of that.
Cool. Thanks for the opportunity, to be part of the conference, but also to share our panel on this podcast. Tash and I have known each other for a few years now. We've worked together on a range of things. My background, I started my career in communications, and then I worked as a diplomat for the New Zealand government for many years based in Asia, and moved back to New Zealand just over 6 years ago, working in corporate communications, reputation management, that type of thing. I do a lot of work in strategy and stakeholder engagement and have a number of governance roles. But diversity, equity, and inclusion is a huge personal passion and focus. And that's actually how I met Tash for the first time and the amazing work that she leads at Pacific Corporation Broadcasting Limited, Pacifica TV. So this session actually came about through the work that Andrew Melville, who's a colleague of mine, and I have been doing with Natasha and her team, and Fitisamanu and her team at Tuputoa, which is another organization that we work with. So I'll let Natasha talk about what they are doing, what they've done at Pacifica TV and her own career, which is absolutely fascinating. But from the perspective of the session, the way that it came together is that COVID forced us all apart at a time when we actually needed to work more closely together. And it had disproportionate impacts on people. And for us here in New Zealand, our Māori, our Indigenous community, Māori and Pacific communities were disproportionately affected. And both two of the panelists we have on this session, and Fitisamanu and Natasha Meleisea, lead organizations that are very much focused around empowering Māori and Pacific communities here in New Zealand, and in the case of PCBL, across the Pacific as well. And it was just fascinating working with them, seeing what they were doing and seeing how they were taking what are very traditional forms of engagement in terms of cultures that are very much around face-to-face and personal connections, and how that had to evolve at a time when we were all locked down. So I'll pause there and pass it on to Natasha to talk about her amazing career and the work that they do at Pacifica TV.
Yeah, a colourful lava. Yeah, I suppose, my background has been in marketing as well as in public policy. And I have had the luxury, and I call it a luxury and a privilege, of working in Indigenous organisations and with Indigenous peoples. And Ziena touched on it as well too, in terms of like Māori and Pacific cultures. And one of my first major kind of, I suppose, experience was working in an Indigenous organisation, was working for a company called My Media Limited, which was what we call iwi owned, and iwi is a Māori tribe as part of Ngāti Whātua, should I say, is the tribe that owned a commercial radio station in Auckland, New Zealand, which is like I would say second to New York, was the most competitive radio market in the world per capita. And we were in an iwi-owned independent radio station up against the major networks. Mm-hmm. And we actually continued and consistently rated number one. And often it used to baffle the networks, saying, how could this little small independent radio station command the airwaves of New Zealand's biggest cities? And like New Zealand's biggest city, Auckland, is also the most very diverse market in there. And so the way we actually did business at that point, which is, and I'm really privileged then to have been part of that organisation, is that it was very culture-based, very values-based. So a lot of the business and decisions that we made were based upon Māori culture. And it was around the promotion of tikanga, which is cultural values, and te reo Māori, which was language. So it was set up as a communications tool to basically, how do we promote our language and culture, Indigenous culture for New Zealand, across the mainstream of New Zealand? How do we make it palatable and appetizing for everyone to accept, embrace the diverse culture of its own Indigenous culture for the country? It got to a point, though, where the market did end up having to swallow up that My FM, and it was just through the economics in that as well, too. But some of those cultural values continue to thrive inside a mainstream New Zealand media organisation, a big giant, which was MediaWorks. And I was part of that transition of the radio station into that entity. Those learnings that I got from My FM, which was like, I was there for about 10 to 11 years, I transferred across to when we established PCBR, Pacific Corporation Broadcasting Limited. It provides Pacifica TV across the whole region. And we work across 13 different countries, 24 broadcasters. And the values that we learned, or the values that we also applied at My FM, were completely relevant to the values that we built PCBL on and Pacifica TV. So understanding our audience and all our people that we are relating to, or that we are targeting in that sense. But also the difference, though, I would say in terms of the Pacific, and it's only slight, is the ethnocultural differences. So each island is not homogenous. Each island has its own kind of cultural nuances for their islands, and that. So it was understanding that, okay, there are differences in there, but let's work together on the similarities. Mm-hmm. So when COVID did come through, we think, okay, we need to quickly gather with our broadcasters in all the different countries, and let's find those common threads where there are similarities, and let's work on those, and let's build on those to ensure that the connectivity, or the connections with the collective still kind of existed as well, too, because we knew that in terms of isolation, as Ziena pointed out, we needed to lean on each other, and people needed to feel that support, especially during the time of COVID, because it was a very scary time for a lot of the countries, for the whole world, right? Because no one actually knew what was going to happen at that point. And February 28th was the day that it hit our shores, or officially hit our shores in New Zealand. And from that moment onwards, it changed. What we did see with some of the broadcasters is that they started to go into lockdown as well. The country started to go in the Pacific, started to go into lockdown because New Zealand went into lockdown. And so that impact of what's next, what was going to happen to the economy, what was going to happen to health systems and that. And so we adapted our services to try and alleviate some of those uncertainties that existed across the region.
So in terms of the session itself, where we're at is looking at, how we've gone from a place during COVID to say, how can communications empower and engage diverse communities, disproportionately impacted communities, to taking those learnings and saying, okay, so that time the focus was on survival, so helping these communities survive. Now, what can we do with those learnings and use communications as a tool to help these communities thrive? And that's what we're hoping to bring to the conference.
So some of the technology that's mentioned in the session description, and I think you touched on a little bit, is the use of holograms. I'm really interested in it's kind of the intersection of the tech, but it's specifically the use of holograms and obviously the role of communicators in this technology. But can you talk a little bit about that? It's not a technology that personally I'm hearing a lot about. But I'm absolutely fascinated how you have been using it or plan to use it.
We've had holograms used in New Zealand more as a sort of a broadcast thing where, someone isn't able to be in a place. And I think in the Indian elections, for example, Prime Minister Modi, before he was elected, that first time round used hologram technology a lot in political rallies. So we've seen it sort of as a broadcast tool in that sense. Throughout the COVID period, as all sort of, conferences and events and things started to move online, a lot of people were using technologies like Teams and Zoom to bring people together. And that worked to an extent. But what was fascinating, and I've moderated quite a few of these events fully online or hybrid, but never one that had holograms. And this is exactly what PCBL and the team at Pacifica TV did when you have so many people based across in so many different places. And here in New Zealand at that time, we had a travel bubble with the Cook Islands. So we could have people traveling from there, but from nowhere else in the Pacific. And it was just fascinating in the way that you had the in-person with the online, with the hologram, all three blended together in this seamless way that brought everyone together in a really, really powerful way. So I'll let Tash talk about the mechanics of that. But just to say, we've taken a piece of technology that has been around for a while, but used more as a broadcast tool rather than two-way engagement. And this was taking it to the next level.
Thanks for that, Ziena. No, absolutely. And I kind of thank our hologram people for actually making it happen. So the actual conference in itself is what Ziena kind of described, which not a lot of people would have seen. Actually was a convergence of three different types of technology. So it was a convergence of Zoom technology integrated with conference software technology, integrated with integrated with TV broadcast technology, and then holograms as well. So there was quite a bit of a technical setup in order to make it happen. And from the technical perspective, when you have Zoom, you usually only have like one camera. It usually just has like one person in the feed. So you don't normally see the full room, or you don't see a pan of an actual room as well too. So what we wanted to try and achieve was that how do we get this kind of intimacy that you would normally get in a discussion at a conference? How do you make this happen virtually? So we know that Zoom works. So we had some of the participants on the Zoom side as well as in the same as in the room in itself, but we wanted to be able to bring people physically, virtually, into the room, because we found that the dynamics actually did change when we actually had a virtual person sitting inside, engaging with each other, answering those questions. And I note a time when Ziena, who was moderating that conference piece, was actually talking to the hologram to his face and asking questions, and that even though they were virtual, you could have done this like here on Zoom, but actually in the room looking, and then everyone looking towards the holograms as opposed to a screen had a different feel to it. But even for the broadcasters themselves, who actually participated in the whole setup, was actually going through the whole thing of setting up their tables in their own broadcast studios with a black tablecloth, looking like they were actually at the conference. Everything was styled as if they were actually in the room. And our guys also just put some like water glasses and some folders on there to make it look like they were actually physically there. I suppose in some ways it took our conference to that next level, and we just wanted to try something differently because we wanted to encourage our broadcasters at a time that's really, really hard, right? When everyone had been hit quite hard by advertising revenue drops, staffing restructures, and that as well. So it was at a point where we needed to look at recovery and resilience, and we wanted to be able to inspire and look at solutions that, hey, we can still innovate at a time together, regardless of the hardships out there. But if we can dream a little, then things can, magic can actually happen in that. And so that's what we wanted to do as well. But I'm not going to take full credit for this. I was inspired by George Lucas and the Jedi Council, and I went to our hologram guy, who happens to be part of our Pacifica TV team, and I recall the conversation that I had with him, and he was driving to Queenstown at that point in time, and I said, can I have a virtual conference where people could have two-way conversations, not just your single individual broadcasts, which is one way where you can record it in that. And he goes, oh, we could do that, but he would need to try it in that. So he was pushing his boundaries and his limits as well in terms of how to think about making this happen. And then having those conversations with the conference people about, is it possible to do this, to create breakout rooms as well? So we would actually simulate what would normally happen in your conference. And so, and I'm not going to give away too much more about what else sort of included in that, but what we wanted to do was have that kind of level of engagement using technology that had been used in the past, but repurposing it so that we can try and build that connectedness.
And what was the feedback like from participants? I mean, I imagine there's initial wow, this is really cool technology, but just the overall engagement, and did you see this, did people really, gravitate to the format? And I'm assuming they did. But just what were some of the things you were hearing from the people that were participating?
From the conference overall, and even the holograms, and that they were blown away by it. They were blown away by being part of an experience, which has been in some ways heralded as definitely a first in New Zealand. Unsure whether it's the first in the world to go to such a complex kind of style to be able to deliver a conference at that kind of format. They appreciated the efforts that we went through to try and make the engagement more personal and try to bring everyone together. It's really set the tone of the direction that we wanted to take, and everyone coming together and building a strategy together, understanding that albeit they're islands in the Pacific, they may think that they're isolated, but technology has enabled them to actually gather together in different ways and forms that they can still operate as well.
I think the other thing around that was just the pride that came together in being part of something that was so high-tech, so innovative, and you don't necessarily think of the Pacific or this part of the world as being world leading in that sense. But here we had created something. We had created something that was underpinned by our very strong values around that connection with people, around engagement, around mutual benefit and mutual returns and all of that. And everyone came together and everyone supported each other through that. So, for me as a moderator, looking at that session and being part of that session was amazing, because you couldn't tell the difference between a broadcaster that might be much, much bigger in terms of scale, in terms of their size, compared to a smaller one, because it was sort of, it equalized, the platform equalized their participation in that sense. So everyone could participate equally, and it didn't matter whether, you were from a tiny island with, tiny resources and tiny budget, because the technology enabled everyone to participate and to engage and be fully there. There are some really quirky things that happened as well, holograms talking to each other and talking to your own hologram and all of that, but we'll save that for the conference. We'll share that at the conference.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a bleeding edge. And I'm just curious, how many people have come to you or tried to copy, what you've done in a flattering way, not stealing, but to say, how do we do this? And have others tried to host something similar to what you've put together?
Yeah, when we did this last year, New Zealand was also hosting APAC.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a whole range of meetings throughout the year. And a lot of those were obviously on the, Microsoft Teams platform. But there were learnings that they took from this. Didn't quite have holograms there, but we did share what we had done, because just what was achieved here was truly phenomenal, in the sense of bringing people together in a way that's very dynamic, so you feel like you are in the same room. And like Tash said earlier, it creates that sense of intimacy that you have at a conference or in a meeting where everyone's in person. So I can see the possibilities of it being leveraged in that sort of conference environment or in that forum environment, that's large scale, international, all of that. But also, at a smaller level, I mean, you think about boards now, for example, organizations have boards where board members are truly international all over the place. and reporting on ESG and things like that, and talking about climate change and talking about travel and whether we should be traveling so much or not. Well, here's an opportunity. Here's a technology that enables you to do that, and you can use it in so many different ways.
So, because I know both of you have done a lot of work in equity, inclusion, and diversity, but I'm curious, just beyond the tech, just kind of your thoughts on communicators and their role with folks in the profession and what they can do to move the needle, and have they been moving the needle? And do you feel like as a profession, there's a lot of momentum there collectively that people are really focused on those kinds of issues?
Yeah, I think communications professionals play a very important role as critique and conscience for an organization. And that's a role that we shouldn't take lightly. And part of that is because we take a stakeholder perspective from get-go. That's our positioning. You ask to communicate something, to a whole range of stakeholders. And because you have to do that, you think of it from their perspective. What's in it for them? What does this mean for them? How does this impact them? And in thinking about how you're going to communicate with them, it forces you to think about, are these actions, how are they going to impact on people? Are they true to our values? Are they true to our vision? Are we doing what we say we're going to do? So I think that in that sense, it's a really important role, and it's one that we shouldn't take lightly, and really think about the influence and impact we can have, rather than simply taking instruction and producing material to sort of inform people. Yep. Or get people to do something. So I think that, taking that role of critique and conscience and sort of being very deliberate about it is really, really powerful.
And I suppose that's something, from my perspective, to add to that, from a communications perspective, is the benefit that we've had has been around adopting a more cultural-centric approach. Mm-hmm. And it's very similar to what Ziena has just sort of expressed as well too, but being able to have that kind of dialogue. And when our program first kind of started, we were set up to help promote New Zealand's values across the region, because we were government funded as part of PCBL, but it wasn't necessarily fully developed to have that kind of real communication, conversation, dialogue, reciprocity, and all those kind of values are really important in Pacific cultures. So there are things that we did, or we have done deliberately as well, to bring that second feedback of having that kind of dialogue back with Pacific, with New Zealand. And we felt that, or we definitely do feel that having that kind of relationship, that reciprocity, has strengthened our service, strengthened who we are, strengthened our values, because we understand who we are trying to reach. And they are also part of our solution. So there's co-design that happens with that. And I think that is a sweet spot where engagement happens. And that is a role that the communicators can play in the future.
Yeah. And with regard to the technology, as much as we know that can bring us together, sort of on the flip side, what are the things that maybe concern you, that things that we need to mitigate to make sure that, in fact, it doesn't create a divide with people, or, because you sometimes see the kind of the dark side of some of these things. So are there things that come to mind that people need to be aware of, in the use of technology? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, Tasha's the expert in this space, so I'm going to let her speak about it. But some of the things that we noticed through this, in terms of going through lockdown, I sit on the boards of a couple of education institutions, and when learning went online, the digital divide and what that means, people who are already marginalized getting that much more disproportionately impacted. And I think the more and more that technology becomes a part of our lives, as it already is, but as we embed it more into everything that we do, we just need to be mindful around those access issues. And that's not just access to devices, but also connectivity. You've got people trying to work from home and study at home, but you've only got one device that can be done on, and you've got a whole family living together. That adds challenges. So people who are already on the margins get even further left behind. So that's a big thing. The other one, I think, is around just biases that are already built in the system. Yeah. And when you have people who, again, if I can use the term, the privileged, who have access to all of this, and then who are then developing the systems, whether that's AI or whatever it might be, that's embedding those biases into this new thing that's created, then you're already pushing people even further behind. And that's just things that we need to be mindful of, because that creates a bigger divide, leads to even more significant equity issues. And the implications of that are massive.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree with what Ziena has just said around the digital divide and access to technology. and the impacts of that when you do not have access. I suppose the other side as well too, which you kind of touched on just before, Peter, was around the dark side in terms of communication, with misinformation, disinformation, and that is something that we are very aware of in our market in the Pacific as well too. And that's why with our role as an organisation is to empower our broadcasters to strengthen media for them so that they can operate in a way that supports democratic processes and ensuring that information is valid and it is responsible in the marketplace. And you're finding you're having these battles with your social medias and also with your traditional broadcasters as well too, because everyone's a broadcaster. You put a phone in their hand and then anything can go just crazy in the marketplace as well too. So it's about how do we use the technology to mitigate a lot of that? How do we have authentic communications with our audiences that we are supporting or that we're reaching? And this is something that we'll talk about at the conference as well too, and how we repurpose. It's not even necessarily a repurpose, it's technology and the tools that they have to ensure that we have trustworthy, meaningful, informative engagement with our different audiences as well. So you can have all your different aspects of tools at your fingertips. It's how we put them together to create that kind of environment. And that will hopefully mitigate any kind of risk that may come from the dark side of technology.
Yes, yeah. So from what you both know, what do you think the profession is going to look like in 10 years? With the sort of this intersection of new technology. I was just interviewing someone about the metaverse. We've got 3 sessions at the conference discussing the metaverse and the role of communicators within that. But, just any thoughts on what the future looks like? I know it's a tough question.
What else, Tash?
Yeah, I suppose it's like, I kind of like call it the rise of the niche, right? So if you think about it, when we had like mainframe computers and then we went to personal computers, we have mainstream broadcasters, and now we have obviously, your niche sort of like storytellers, content creators, and that as well. So as things begin to evolve, we'll begin to have like all these different kind of pockets of different kind of broadcast technologies that are out there as well. So I kind of see the rise of that, but also what does it mean in terms of, and this is a discussion that I had with our hologram guy yesterday around the holograms with AI and blockchain technology as well. And I think that'll be an absolutely fascinating time to sort of see that. And I think we're just kind of like on the brink of all of those different kind of technologies, which they call disruptive now. And I love it when they call it disruptive because it means that it's almost on the verge of becoming mainstream. So, we've seen technology sort of change the music market. We saw the introduction of MP3s and then iPods. And then we saw, obviously, Spotify's and Netflix, the OTT platforms and all that kind of stuff. And what I don't think it's going to be an either or kind of like direction. I think it's going to be a hybrid of a mixture of all on that. So, I do also see in having that technology available that we're going to see far more opportunities for more isolated communities, and we may say in the islands, and I reference the Pacific because it is the area that we are concerned with, being able to access opportunities across the world from their own little island, and they don't have to leave home to be effective or to participate in economic opportunities as well. So, a shift from primary industries to, the technology issues as well too. Yeah, so that's kind of where I sort of see it in terms of like how the industry may use different kind of technologies to benefit itself.
Yeah.
The other thing there is that, content will always be important, but who creates it, where it's hosted, how people access it, how they engage with it, that'll all continue to evolve. And I think one thing that, we as communications professionals need to be mindful of is that actually we sort of think about it in terms of this career. We've gone and done the training. We work in this area, in this industry. We provide these services, if you like, to our organizations or clients, whoever we work with. But actually everyone, like Tash said, you have a mobile phone in your hand. Everyone's a communicator. And so working collaboratively with people, sometimes there'll be some random person in the middle of nowhere who actually does more for your organization in terms of communications than the communications team does. And just recognizing that just because we have that in our title doesn't necessarily mean that we are the only people who can do that. So as a profession, just being mindful of that, we will be able to achieve more and create greater impact the more we work collaboratively across the board with a whole range of different people and different providers who may or may not consider themselves as communicators, but are actually doing that and doing it pretty well.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I've been thinking about that a lot, where you have people that are very skillful at communications and would never consider themselves communicators. So, but that's a really interesting point. Well, I do have one last question for you. We ask all of our guests, but what gets both of you up in the morning? Whether it's something, your dog, or
the alarm on my phone,
some inspiration.
And clearly the computer's talking
clock.
to me as well. I think it's practically the alarm on my phone. I have 3 actually, and I snooze them all. It's like 5 minutes into mornings are not my thing. Sort of on a more, like what drives me perspective, it's really about bringing equity and opportunity to those with diverse backgrounds, abilities, and experiences. And we're talking here about communications and technology, and they are both strong enablers to try and achieve that.
How about you, Natasha?
Yeah, I adding to what Ziena has said as well, is what drives me is making a meaningful difference. Actually, I'm a sucker for the underdogs, and I suppose I picked this project, and I've never really picked the easy projects. I've picked the ones that have said there's no way that could possibly happen. It is absolutely impossible. You're nuts. You're crazy. Don't go there. Stick with the mainstream. Tried and true. Absolute certainty. And there I am, trotting off to, this project is bound to fail. And I will pick it up and I will run with it until it succeeds. And so in some ways, for me, and I am a Pacific person, so my heritage is Samoan, and my whole career, a lot of my career, I actually worked in different organizations and considered in terms of the mainstream kind of industry. And in ways, this is my opportunity, and I call it my education with my internships with other organizations to actually give back to the Pacific. So this is my opportunity to take the best that I have learned from different people, from different diverse backgrounds, incorporate it into PCBR and Pacifica TV, and offer those same kind of opportunities for our Pacific communities across the whole region as well. That's what drives me.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to meeting you in person in New York. And thanks so much for spending some time to talk about what you'll be presenting on. And yeah, I will definitely be at the session.
Thank you for having us. Tasha and I are very excited because for both of us, it's our first trip to New York. So we are doubly excited.
Yes.
It's an awesome city. Yeah.
The city that never sleeps.
That's right.
And then we will be there. Eyes wide open.
Thanks so much to Ziena and Natasha. And it was a really fascinating discussion. I'm really looking forward to their session. Just remind you, the name of their session is Connecting Via Technology to Address COVID, Climate Change, and Conflict. That session will be Wednesday, the 29th at 9 a.m. And thanks so much to Yeni for providing a little bit more information about remote proctoring, which we think is going to be very helpful for a lot of the people that have already applied to take the exam, and those that are interested. I think it removes a big barrier for folks. So thank you to Yeni and also the GCCC, the council working on it. So with that, we will see you at the World Conference.